the implication for Britain's national security. Mr. Speaker,
The long silence of Westminster had ended. After weeks of quiet corridors and empty green benches, Parliament came back to life with its usual roar. The summer recess was always a strange pause in British politics. The headlines never completely stopped. Scandals and policy debates kept trickling through the newspapers, but the central stage of the House of Commons remained in darkness. And so, when MPs finally returned, the expectation was always intense. The public, the press, and the politicians themselves came armed with unfinished business. This year, the stakes were even higher. The cost of living crisis still weighed heavily on families. The NHS struggled under record demand, and immigration remained a divisive question tearing through debates. The mood in the country was restless, and everyone knew that the clash inside the Commons chamber would be louder than ever. Prime Minister's Questions, or PMQs, was not just a tradition. It was theatre. It was combat. It was the one moment each week when the government and opposition locked horns directly, in front of a packed house and a nation eager for confrontation. After a summer of speeches, interviews, and staged visits, this was raw politics in its purest form. The leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer, had sharpened his arguments over the recess. His party's rising poll numbers gave him confidence, and many expected him to use this first PMQs after the break as a platform to prove his strength. Yet what no one fully anticipated was the force that would come from the government benches, a voice that would cut through the noise and leave even Starmer unsettled. As MPs filed back into the chamber, the air was thick with anticipation. There was an edge to every glance, every whispered conversation. The Conservatives had spent much of the summer trying to close ranks after internal disputes and growing public criticism. Labour, on the other hand, smelled opportunity, eager to show they could handle leadership. The press gallery above was crammed with journalists, their pens ready to capture every word, every slip, every sign of weakness. And so, when the Speaker finally called the session to order, it was as if a storm had broken loose. The quiet weeks of summer were gone, replaced with shouts, cheers, and jeers echoing off the wood-panelled walls. The return from recess was not just another meeting. It carried symbolism. It marked the shift from holiday calm to political battle. Every MP knew that their words would carry extra weight. For the government, this was the chance to reset, to push back against criticism, and to prove they still had the authority to govern. For the opposition, this was the chance to expose cracks, to frame the Conservatives as tired and divided, and to show the nation that change was not just possible, but necessary. And for those watching at home, this was politics returning with full force, a reminder that decisions made in this chamber would shape their daily lives. And yet, beneath the drama of party lines, one figure was quietly waiting to step into the spotlight. Not the Prime Minister himself, not even the leader of the opposition, but someone who had become known for her sharp tongue, her uncompromising style, and her growing influence within the Conservative Party. As the session began, few could have predicted just how much of the spotlight she would steal. But within minutes, it became clear that Kemi Badenoch was not going to let this be a routine clash. She was ready to shake the room and rattle her opponents. The summer recess had ended, and the silence was broken in a way few would forget. The House of Commons had a very particular energy on the first day back. It was not just the noise that set it apart. Though the shouts and jeers were louder than usual, it was the sense that every word mattered more, that every exchange carried the weight of weeks of pent-up frustration. MPs had returned from their constituencies, full of stories, complaints, and demands from the public. Each of them wanted their voice heard. Each of them wanted to prove that the break had not softened their resolve. And as the Speaker looked over the crowded chamber, he knew he would have a difficult task keeping order. The green benches were packed, the galleries buzzing, and the cameras rolling. Everyone was waiting for a fight. The tension between the parties was visible before a single word was spoken. On the government benches, Conservatives leaned in together, whispering strategies, rehearsing lines, and laughing with forced confidence. They knew the past few months had not been easy. The country's problems had piled higher, and the opposition had sharpened its attacks. They needed strength, unity, and someone who could project confidence. On the Labour benches, the mood was different, calm but determined. Their leader, Keir Starmer, had been preparing carefully. His questions were precise, his delivery measured, and his eyes locked on the government front bench. He wanted to show control, to appear steady while the Conservatives appeared shaky. The clash was inevitable. Outside the chamber, the media had already framed this PMQs as a test. Could the Prime Minister defend his record? Could Starmer land blows strong enough to shift the polls further? Commentators called it a first battle after summer, a moment that would set the tone for the political season ahead. And yet, as the Prime Minister began his answers, another presence drew attention. Sitting a few seats away with an expression that carried both patience and readiness was Kemi Badenoch. Her reputation preceded her. She had made a name for herself as a fighter, someone unafraid of controversy, someone who could take the opposition head-on with blunt, unapologetic words. Even before she spoke, the awareness of her presence changed the atmosphere. Some Conservatives seemed reassured. Some Labour MPs looked cautious. Everyone knew she could tip the balance in unexpected ways. The noise rose and fell as questions were exchanged, but it was clear that the room was waiting for something bigger. When Badenoch finally leaned forward, her voice cut through the air. She did not speak like someone easing back into routine. She spoke like someone who had been waiting for this moment, ready to make an impact. Her tone was sharp, her delivery quick, and her words carried weight. Instantly, the chamber erupted. Cheers from one side, groans from the other. The speaker struggled to restore order, but the energy had shifted. This was no longer just about Starmer and the Prime Minister. This was about Badenoch, stepping into the spotlight, and she was not going to waste her chance. The build-up had ended. The clash had truly begun. From the very moment Kemi Badenoch rose to her feet, the chamber felt different. The conversations that had been buzzing in the background came to a halt. All eyes shifted toward her. She was not the Prime Minister, nor the official spokesperson for the government in this session, but her voice carried an authority that demanded attention. Badenoch had developed a reputation as one of the most unapologetic figures on the Conservative benches. She had often spoken her mind without hesitation, challenging even members of her own party when she believed they were wrong. That direct style had earned her both admirers and critics, but above all, it had made her impossible to ignore. On this day, returning from recess with the nation watching closely, she seemed fully aware of the stage she had been given. She was not going to speak softly. She was going to seize the moment. Badenoch's rise in the Conservative Party had been swift. She had been described as sharp, fearless, and unwilling to bend under pressure. Her speeches often cut through the usual fog of political language. While many politicians leaned on carefully chosen phrases, Badenoch spoke plainly, almost brutally at times, and it was that quality that made her stand out. Supporters believed she represented a refreshing honesty in politics. Critics accused her of being confrontational, even divisive. But no one doubted that when she spoke, people listened. In a chamber where noise and distraction were constant, she had the rare ability to silence the room with the sheer weight of her delivery. As she began to address Starmer directly, the reaction was immediate. The Commons erupted, Conservatives cheering loudly, Labour MPs shouting back in frustration, and the Speaker's voice struggling to bring order. Her attack was not just loud, it was calculated. She challenged Starmer's credibility, questioned his consistency, and accused him of hiding behind rehearsed lines rather than speaking honestly about the problems facing the country. Her words struck a chord with her own benchers, who responded with thunderous applause and desk-thumping approval. On the Labour side, the anger was clear. Some MPs shouted back, others shook their heads, but all of them recognised the effectiveness of the moment. Starmer himself tried to maintain composure, but the look in his eyes betrayed irritation. He had prepared for questions from the Prime Minister, not a surprise assault from one of the party's rising stars. This was not the exchange he had anticipated, and it showed. The chamber thrives on spectacle, and Badenoch delivered it. Every sharp sentence, every pointed remark added fuel to the fire. The noise grew louder, the tension higher, until it felt as if the very walls of the chamber were vibrating with energy. She reminded the room and the country that politics was not only about policy details, but also about strength of presence. A leader, or someone who aspired to leadership, had to prove they could dominate a room, control a debate, and unsettle their opponent. On that count, Badenoch succeeded. She rattled Starmer, drew the attention of the press, and sent a clear message to her own party that she was not merely another minister, but someone capable of shaping the fight. By the time she sat back down, the tone of PMQs had shifted entirely. It was no longer just a contest between the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition. It had become a wider battle for dominance, and Badenoch had made sure her voice was at the centre of it. In the space of a few minutes, she had taken the spotlight, seized control of the atmosphere, and left her mark on one of the most anticipated sessions of the year. The return from summer recess had already been dramatic, but with her intervention, it became unforgettable. Keir Starmer entered the chamber with a plan he had been refining over the summer break. He knew the public expected him to show strength, clarity, and control after months of building momentum in the polls. His strategy was not to fight with noise or anger, but to present himself as the steady hand, the alternative leader Britain could trust. Every question he had prepared was designed to expose weaknesses in the government's record. He wanted to press on the cost of living crisis, highlight the failures of the health system, and underline the government's inability to provide stability after years of turbulence. For Starmer, this PMQs was about showing the nation that he was not just an opposition figure, but a prime minister in waiting. He was careful with his tone, precise with his words, and deliberate in his pauses. It was clear he wanted to come across as calm and measured, especially against a government he painted as chaotic. Starmer's approach was also tactical. He knew the first session after recess always drew greater attention from the press and public. His questions were crafted not only to challenge the Prime Minister directly, but to resonate outside the chamber. Each phrase was built for headlines. Each attack aimed at drawing a clear contrast between Labour's vision and the Conservatives' record. He positioned himself as the voice of ordinary families, invoking rising bills, crumbling services, and the frustration people felt after years of promises with little delivery. In his delivery, he avoided emotional outbursts, preferring instead the sharp tone of a barrister questioning a witness. His background in law showed in the way he structured his arguments, layer by layer, point by point, closing every gap before moving on to the next. Yet, for all his preparation, Starmer could not completely control the environment of the Commons. The chamber thrived on interruptions, heckles, and eruptions of laughter. Each time he tried to press a point, government benches responded with jeers. The Prime Minister countered with rehearsed defences, turning answers into opportunities to praise his party's record. Starmer absorbed it all with a fixed expression, refusing to lose composure, but the effort was visible. His strategy depended on projecting calm authority. But that image was constantly under threat from the noise of the chamber and the unpredictable nature of live confrontation. Still, he pushed forward, refusing to be knocked off script. He reminded the room of waiting lists in the NHS, highlighted inflation's impact on household budgets, and demanded accountability for broken promises. But what Starmer had not anticipated was the intervention from Kemi Badenoch. His plan had been to spar with the Prime Minister, using carefully constructed questions to box him in. Instead, he found himself facing sharp interruptions and biting remarks from Badenoch, who was unafraid to break through the structure of the session. Her presence disrupted his rhythm. While he continued to fire his questions, the attention of the room and of the press gallery was no longer focused solely on his exchanges with the Prime Minister. Instead, it was scattered, drawn toward the rising voice of Badenoch. This shift mattered, because Starmer's calculated approach relied on focus, on a clear contrast between himself and the government leader. With Badenoch inserting herself into the debate, that clarity was blurred. Even so, Starmer tried to hold his ground. He leaned into his usual style of measured criticism, repeating his central message that the Conservatives were out of ideas and out of time. His supporters on the Labour benches cheered him on, rising to counter the noise from across the aisle. He pressed forward with determination, as if sheer persistence would bring the focus back to his questions. But the chamber is not always kind to careful planning. The unexpected can turn order into chaos, and on this day it was Badenoch's fierce energy that tilted the balance. Starmer had arrived prepared to dominate through calm precision, but by the midpoint of the session, it was clear that control was slipping from his hands. The clash had become more unpredictable, and the spotlight he had hoped to command was now shared. His calculated approach was not enough to shield him from the raw force of confrontation that defined this return from recess.